we used to build in this country, thanks to you, and our new strategy is we are now building again.
This week, the Pentagon paused an 86-year-old bilateral defense board claiming Canada had failed to make credible progress on its defense commitments. The same week, Canada's largest ever defense trade show opened its doors in Ottawa. 20,000 attendees, 300 exhibitors, over 100 international delegations, double the size of previous years. And Mark Carney walked onto that stage and made a series of announcements that answered the Pentagon's claim more completely than any diplomatic response could have. Canada has entered negotiations to procure Saab's Global Eye airborne early warning and control system for Arctic defense, the most sophisticated airborne surveillance platform available, capable of tracking objects and signals up to 650 kilometers away. Built on a Bombardier aircraft with 35% Canadian content, Canada has committed to reaching 4% of gross domestic product in total defense spending by the end of this decade. Already provisioned in the fiscal framework, already funded. And Canada has become the first non-European country to join the European Union's Defense Procurement Initiative, building the alternative security partnerships that make dependency on Washington's goodwill progressively less necessary. This is what credible progress looks like. And it was all announced before Carney boarded a plane to New York to pitch Canada's $500 billion defense investment opportunity to Wall Street. Start with the announcement nobody saw coming. Because the Global Eye deal is not just a procurement decision, it is a statement about what build, partner, buy actually produces when it moves from strategy document to signed negotiation.
I'm pleased to announce that Canada has entered into negotiations to procure Saab's airborne early warning and control aircraft. The Global Eye's airborne surveillance capability can track objects and signals up to 650 kilometers away, and they'll share in real time that information with the Canadian forces and our allies. At the heart of the Global Eye's system is the Canadian-made Bombardier Global 6500, an aircraft that includes 20% U.S. content, which gives a sense of just how integrated these defense systems are. Saab and Bombardier's expertise is transforming a modern jet into a cutting-edge surveillance aircraft with altitudes of over 30,000 feet. The Global Eye partnership will establish Canadian-based production capability, including aircraft conversion and missionization, engineering collaboration, R&D, and potential participation in radar component production, positioning Canada as an integral part of the Global Eye global supply chain.
Canadian-made Bombardier Global 6500. That detail is doing a lot of strategic work in this announcement. Because the Global Eye is not simply a foreign purchase, it is a partnership that roots a significant portion of the aircraft's production capability in Canada. At least 35% Canadian content in the base aircraft, Canadian-based conversion and missionization, Canadian engineering collaboration, Canadian research and development, Canadian participation in radar component production. That is the build, partner, buy framework in action. Canada cannot build an airborne early warning system from scratch today, but Canada can partner with Saab, which has the world's leading capability in this domain, while ensuring that the partnership develops Canadian industrial capability rather than simply transferring procurement dollars to a foreign supplier. And the strategic significance of the Global Eye for Arctic defense is substantial. An aircraft that can track objects and signals up to 650 kilometers away, sharing information in real time with Canadian forces and allied partners, provides exactly the kind of domain awareness that Canada's year-round Arctic presence requires. The threats in the Arctic are evolving rapidly. Hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, advanced submarine incursions, a surveillance platform that covers 650 kilometers in every direction from a single aircraft fundamentally changes Canada's ability to detect and respond to those threats. France chose Global Eye. Sweden chose it. The United Arab Emirates chose it. And now Canada is negotiating to join that group, Not because it was available, because it is the best available option for Arctic defense, and because the partnership produces Canadian industrial capability alongside Canadian security capability. That is the difference between procurement and strategy. Now for the number that changes everything about the Pentagon's Defense Board pause. Not 2%, not 3.5%, 4%.
Canada has achieved NATO's 2% GDP defense expenditure target half a decade ahead of the original schedule. I have to say, for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I don't know if that's an accomplishment or an admission, but we're there. We are working towards NATO's 3.5% of GDP in 2035 defense expenditure target through major new investments in strategic capabilities, including a modernized submarine fleet and one of the world's largest fleets of icebreakers to strengthen our defense of the Arctic. We are already meeting NATO's 1.5% target for critical defense infrastructure, from upgraded ports, airports, air bases, to new northern operational support hubs to deter threats in the north. And our fiscal framework, our budget, has already provisioned to achieve 4% of GDP in total defense spending by the end of this decade, ahead of NATO's timetable. We will make additional provisions to achieve that 5% NATO target, the 2035 target, at or ahead of schedule.
Already provisioned. Those two words are the most important in that entire passage, because the difference between promising to reach a spending target and having already provisioned the funding in the fiscal framework is the difference between political rhetoric and binding financial commitment. Canada has not just committed to reaching 4% of gross domestic product in total defense spending. It has already put the money in the budget. The fiscal framework already contains the provision. It is not contingent on future budget decisions or future parliamentary approval. It is already there. Let that land in the context of the Pentagon's decision to pause the Permanent Joint Board on Defense, citing Canada's failure to make credible progress on its defense commitments. 2% achieved half a decade ahead of schedule. 4% already provisioned. 5% targeted at or ahead of schedule. And Carney delivered that number with the characteristic self-awareness that makes the line memorable. I do not know if that is an accomplishment or an admission, because meeting the NATO target for the first time since the Berlin Wall fell is a genuine achievement and a genuine indictment simultaneously. An achievement because Canada got there. An admission because it took this long. But the 4% number is not about the past. It is about the future. A Canada that has provisioned 4% of gross domestic product for defense is a Canada that Washington cannot credibly accuse of insufficient commitment. And a Canada that is targeting 5% at or ahead of the 2035 schedule is a Canada that is building the sovereign defense capability that makes the Permanent Joint Board on Defense pause feel exactly as small as it actually is. The third announcement at CANSEC is the one that most directly answers Washington's attempt to use defense cooperation as a pressure tool.
Canada became the first non-European country to join the EU's Safe Defense Procurement Initiative. Now, using that new framework, we're beginning to move ahead with ambitious major investments for our defense and security. So foreign contractors that secure Canadian defense contracts will now have stronger incentives to subcontract to Canadian firms and invest in our supply chains. Said another way, they will get more credit for doing so. We're cutting red tape with a new 90-day approval standard, so companies, especially small businesses, get faster and more predictable decisions. We're introducing something called the Strategic Investment Transaction. And this is a new crediting system for high-value investments, such as building or expanding a Canadian facility, funding R&D in Canada, or transferring IP to a Canadian company.
The first non-European country. That distinction matters enormously in the current strategic environment, because the European Union's Defense Procurement Initiative is not simply a purchasing framework. It is a security community. a group of countries that have agreed to coordinate their defense industrial investments, share technology, integrate supply chains, and build collective capability that serves shared security interests. Canada joining that community as the first non-European member changes the geometry of Canada's security relationships in ways that go far beyond any single procurement decision. It means Canadian defense companies have preferential access to European defense contracts. It means European defense technology flows to Canadian industry on terms unavailable to non-members. It means the security partnership that Canada is building with Nordic countries, with Germany, with France, has an institutional framework that makes it durable rather than dependent on any particular government's preferences. And the new industrial and technological benefits policy that Carney announced alongside the EU membership is the domestic complement to the international partnership. Foreign contractors that win Canadian defense contracts must now subcontract to Canadian firms and invest in Canadian supply chains at higher rates. High-value investments like building Canadian facilities, funding Canadian research and development, and transferring intellectual property to Canadian companies receive additional credits that make working with Canada more attractive. The Build, Partner, Buy framework is being embedded into every contract, every partnership, every procurement decision, not as a preference, as a requirement. And the result? Compounded over the decade of 4% gross domestic product defense spending that is already provisioned, is a Canadian defense industrial base that no social media post from Washington can pause. Now connect all of it to the number Carney mentioned almost casually while announcing he was heading to New York the next morning.
$500 billion of defense-related investment in the course of the next decade in Canada. Even in New York, that's real money, that's of interest, and there's opportunities to partner, and those will be the discussions.
And we plan to increase our defense sector revenues by over 220%, our defense exports by 50%, and to create 125,000 new jobs in the sector. These are stable, rewarding careers, including for the more than 80,000 Canadians who already work in our defense industry.
Even in New York, that's real money. That line, delivered with a grin at CANSEC, is the bridge between the defense industrial strategy and the Wall Street pitch. Because $500 billion of defense-related investment over the next decade is not just a security commitment, it is an investment opportunity of a scale that Wall Street takes seriously. 220% increase in defense sector revenues, 50% increase in defense exports, 125,000 new jobs, 85% increase in research and development investment. Those are not defense statistics. Those are economic statistics that any fund manager evaluating a 10-year investment thesis would find compelling. And CANSEC's record attendance tells you the investment community has already noticed. 20,000 attendees, 300 exhibitors, over 100 international delegations, the largest CANSEC ever. Companies from across the world coming to Ottawa to understand what $470 billion in Canadian defense procurement looks like as an investment opportunity. The same week CANSEC opened, Carney was in New York telling Wall Street that even in New York, $500 billion is real money. The two events are not separate. They are the same pitch delivered to two different audiences simultaneously. To the defense industry in Ottawa, here is the framework, here is the money, here is how you access it. To Wall Street in New York, here is the opportunity, here is the stability, here is why Canada is the most attractive infrastructure investment destination in the world. Both audiences heard the same number, $500 billion. Even in New York, that's real money. Canada will be defined not only by the strength of our values, but also the value of our strength. Carney said that at CANSEC this week, and it is the sentence that connects everything announced in that room. The Global Eye negotiations define the value of Canada's strength in the Arctic. a 650-kilometer surveillance radius built on Canadian manufacturing, Canadian engineering, Canadian research and development, not purchased from Washington, negotiated with a European partner on terms that build Canadian sovereign capability. The 4% gross domestic product commitment, already provisioned in the fiscal framework, defines the value of Canada's strength in NATO. Half a decade ahead of the 2% target, on track for 5% by 2035. Already funded, not a promise, a budget line. The European Union Defence Procurement Partnership defines the value of Canada's strength in its alternative alliance network, the first non-European member, an institutional framework for security cooperation that exists independently of Washington's preferences. And the $500 billion investment opportunity defines the value of Canada's strength on Wall Street. Even in New York, that's real money. And Carney made sure New York heard it the same week Ottawa was proving it. The Pentagon paused aboard this month, citing Canada's failure to make credible progress. Canada just announced the Global Eye, committed to 4%, joined the European Union Defense Initiative, and opened the largest defense trade show in its history. That is what credible progress looks like. And Washington is going to have to find a new argument. Stay with this channel. Every move Canada makes, we will be here to explain exactly what it means.